The man laughed too loud at table 7, thinking 11 quiet years erased one mistake, until Bumpy Johnson sat down, calm as stone, and the room understood a blade didn't need speed. The laugh landed wrong, not loud enough to be reckless, not soft enough to disappear. It slipped out of the man at table 7, like a habit he never broke, loose, confident, careless. The kind of laugh a man makes when he believes the past has stopped looking for him. Forks paused midair. A glass froze inches from my mouth. Bumpy Johnson didn't look up right away. He sat where he always chose to sit, back to the wall, eyes forward, the whole room laid out in clean lines, no rush in him, no tension in his shoulders, just patience, practice, and absolute. The laugh came again. This time Bumpy lifted his eyes, not sharply, not with anger, just enough to acknowledge the sound existed. He didn't need to ask who it was. Harlem had already told him without speaking, the way chairs leaned back, the way conversation thinned, the way men suddenly remembered appointments they were late for. Table 7 sat too comfortably for a table that was close to the wall. The man there wore a clean suit, tailored somewhere south of here, hair neat, hands are soft. He looked like someone who believed reinvention worked if you stayed gone long enough. 11 years in his mind was a lifetime. To Bumpy, it was a pause between sentences. The man didn't see him yet. He was still smiling, still leaning toward his companion, still living inside the echo of his own safety. He had learned how to survive by leaving. I learned how to forget by staying busy. What he never learned was how memory works in Harlem. Bumpy stood. No announcement followed, no scrape of drama. Just the quiet shift of gravity as a man with weight decided to move. The room adjusted around him instinctively, like it always did. Step, pause, another step. Each one erased the distance the man thought was permanent. Someone whispered his name without meaning to. Someone else stopped breathing long enough to notice they were afraid, not of violence, but of certainty. When Bumpy reached table 7, he didn't stare. He sat, close enough that the man could feel him before seeing him, close enough that history could breathe again. Only then did the man turn. The smile stayed for half a second too long. Then it broke. Bumpy said nothing. He didn't have to. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and undeniable. The kind of silence that reminds a man that running only works until the road circles back. The laugh was gone now, in its place, understanding. Bumpy folded his hands on the table, calm as stone, eyes steady. The past had finally taken its seat. And it wasn't leaving early. Harlem didn't need announcements. It recognized authority the way the body recognizes pain, instantly, without explanation. When Bumpy Johnson sat at table 7, the room recalibrated, not because he demanded it, because everyone remembered what happened when respect was ignored. Men who had been talking leaned back. Men who had been listening leaned forward. Even the music seemed to lower itself, as if it understood this was not its moment. Bumpy didn't scan the room. He never did. Scanning suggested uncertainty. Instead, he stayed still, letting Harlem come to him the way it always had. In glances, in posture, in the small unconscious rituals of deference. A waiter approached, then stopped. Another took his place, then thought better of it. No one interrupted a table when Bumpy sat at it. The man across from him felt the shift but couldn't name it. He had lived too long in places where power shouted, where authority announced itself with noise and excess. He had forgotten how dangerous quiet could be. Harlem hadn't forgotten. This wasn't fear. Fear was quick and sloppy. This was loyalty, shaped over years. Bumpy had paid for funerals without cameras. He had settled disputes before blood spilled into the streets. He had been punished when he had to, and protected when it mattered. That kind of leadership didn't fade when a man left town. It waited. Across the room, a young runner locked eyes with Bumpy for half a second, just long enough to receive instruction without words. Stay still. Let this play out. The runner nodded once and disappeared. Bumpy shifted slightly in his chair, just enough to get comfortable. He wasn't here to rush. Rushing was for men without control. Control meant choosing the pace. The man at the table swallowed. He noticed now how no one was looking directly at him anymore. How the space around him had subtly widened, like the room itself was stepping back. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. Bumpy finally looked at him fully then, not as an enemy, not even as a problem, just as something unfinished. You picked a loud place, Bumpy said quietly. Not an accusation, an observation. The man nodded too fast. Didn't think. Bumpy lifted one finger. The sentence died. Around them, Harlem listened, not with ears, but with memory. Everyone knew this wasn't about a laugh, or a table, or even 11 years. It was about order, and order, once broken, always returned to the man who built it. Bumpy leaned back slightly, giving the man space he didn't deserve but desperately needed. That was his way. He never crashed immediately. He let understanding do the work first. Outside, traffic moved. Life continued. Harlem breathed. Inside, at table 7, the city remembered who sat where, and who never truly left. The man had always believed distance was a kind of absolution. You left. You stayed gone. You became someone else. That was the math he trusted. 11 years earlier, he'd crossed a line quietly. No shouting, no public drama. Just a decision made when he thought no one was watching. Information traded. Loyalty bent. Survival. Chosen over principle. At the time, it felt smart. He disappeared before consequences could form. New city. New name spoken with a different rhythm. He told himself Harlem would move on. That Bumpy Johnson had bigger enemies, louder problems, fresher grudges. Men like Bumpy, he assumed, didn't remember small betrayals. What he never understood was this. Bumpy didn't sort men by size of offense. He sorted them by meaning. Betrayal wasn't violence, it was worse. Violence ended things. Betrayal kept them open. Bumpy had learned that early. Learned that the man who smiled while breaking trust was more dangerous than the one who pulled a trigger. So he never chased immediately, never reacted on someone else's schedule. He waited. Time was not mercy, time was storage. Across from him now, the man felt the weight of that truth settling into his chest. All those years he thought were padding suddenly felt like proof. Proof that Bumpy's patience ran longer than his fear. You did good for yourself, Bumpy said calmly, eyes steady. The words landed gently, almost kind. The man nodded, unsure if this was permission or indictment. I stayed clean, he said too quickly. Kept my head down. Bumpy gave the smallest smile. Not amusement, recognition. That's what you were always good at, he said. Keeping your head down when it mattered to you. The sentence hung there. It wasn't an attack. It was a mirror. The man's hands trembled slightly as he folded them together, trying to look composed. He wanted to explain, to justify, to turn the past into a misunderstanding. But explanations were loud. And this room belonged to the quiet. Around them, no one intervened. No one needed to. Harlem understood that running created debts, and debts didn't disappear, just because a man learned new streets. Bumpy leaned forward a fraction, just enough. You thought I forgot, he said, not accusing, certain. The man didn't answer. He couldn't, because in that moment he finally understood what 11 years really were. Not a shield, not an escape, just a longer walk back to the same table. Bumpy sat back again, unhurried, letting the realization settle fully. He wasn't angry. Anger rushed things. Anger made mistakes. This wasn't about punishment yet. This was about truth catching up. And truth, once it arrived, never left empty-handed. No one raised their voice. That was the strangest part. The man had expected anger, maybe a warning, maybe even a scene, something loud enough to negotiate with, something he could respond to, argue against, survive. But Bumpy offered him nothing to fight. Silence did the work instead. The table felt smaller now, like the edges had crept inward. The man shifted in his chair, then stopped himself. Movement felt wrong here, like disrespect. Bumpy rested his forearms on the table, relaxed. He wasn't looming. He wasn't posturing. He was simply present, and presence carried weight. You ever notice, Bumpy said softly, how some men confuse time with forgiveness? The man swallowed. I never meant. Bumpy raised his hand again, slow, controlled. The interruption wasn't rejection. It was a correction. I'm not asking why, Bumpy said. Why is for men who want to feel better? He glanced around the room just once. Every face he saw already knew the answer. This wasn't interrogation. This was alignment. Pressure came not from threat, but from narrowing options. The man realized no one would step in. No friend, no staff, no stranger with a sense of heroism. Harlem had decided this was not their moment to speak. This was Bumpy's. You took something, Bumpy continued. Not money, not territory. He tapped the table once with his knuckle, a soft sound, louder than it should have been. You took certainty. That was the wound. That was the line. Certainty kept order. Certainty kept men from guessing wrong. When trust broke quietly, everything around it had to be watched twice as hard. The man's voice came out smaller than he intended. I paid for it. I lost everything. Bumpy looked at him, truly looked this time. No, he said calmly. You lost nothing you valued. The sentence landed with finality. Across the room someone stood, then sat back down when they realized standing was unnecessary. Everything was under control. Bumpy leaned back again, creating space but not relief. This isn't about what happens next, he said. It's about what's already decided. The man felt it then. The trap without walls, the pressure without violence. There was no path forward that didn't pass through accountability. Bumpy wasn't forcing him anywhere. He was letting him arrive. An arrival, in this room, had consequences. The razor didn't appear like a threat. It appeared like a decision already made. Bumpy reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he has no fear of being stopped. No one flinched. No one gasped. The room had already accepted that whatever happened next belonged here. He placed the razor on the table, not close to the man's throat, not angled for drama, just flat, clean, honest. Metal against wood made a sound sharper than any shout. The man stared at it, breath shallow now. This wasn't how he imagined it ending. He had prepared himself for fists, maybe worse. Something fast, something violent enough to justify panic. This was worse. This was calm. Bumpy didn't touch the razor again. He didn't need to. Its presence was punctuation, Nothing more. A reminder that restraint was a choice, not a weakness. You see, Bumpy said quietly, violence is easy. He let the sentence breathe. Respect takes discipline. The man nodded without realizing he was nodding. Sweat gathered at his temple. His entire body leaned away from the blade, though Bumpy hadn't moved an inch. The power in the room didn't come from the weapon. It came from the fact that Bumpy hadn't used it yet. You ran, Bumpy continued. You lived well, slept clean. Another pause. But you carried this, he said, tapping the table lightly beside the razor. Every day, whether you admitted it or not. The man's voice cracked. What do you want? Bumpy finally picked up the razor. Not fast, not slow. Just enough to remind him that patience could end. I want balance, Bumpy said. And balance costs something. He leaned in then, close enough that the man could smell his cologne, feel the steadiness of his breath. There was no hatred in his eyes, only certainty. This isn't punishment, Bumpy said. This is closure. What happened next was quiet, controlled, almost surgical. No spectacle for the room to feed on, no chaos, just a line drawn where one had been owed for 11 years. The man didn't scream. He didn't fight, because he finally understood. This was mercy, shaped by principle. When Bumpy stood, the razor was gone again, back where it belonged, unseen, finished. The room exhaled as one. Calm had won, and calm in Harlem always spoke the loudest. Bumpy didn't linger. He never did after things were settled. Lingering invited confusion. It turned order into theater. And he had no interest in being applauded for restraint. He straightened his coat, nodded once to the table, not to the man but to the moment, and stepped away. The chair slid back into place behind him, untouched by hurry. Around the room, conversations didn't restart right away. People needed a second, not to process what they'd seen, but to absorb what it meant. Harlem was good at that. It didn't gossip at first. It was memorable. The lesson wasn't the razor, it was the weight. 11 years had passed, and still the account had been balanced. Not out of rage, not out of ego, out of principle. That was the part people carried with them when they left. A young man near the bar whispered, "He could have done worse." An older one shook his head. He did exactly enough. That was Bumpy's legacy. Exactly enough. Outside, the streetlights buzzed, cars passed. Life continued the way it always did when order was held. No sirens, no panic. Just Harlem settling back into itself. Bumpy stepped into the night, the cool air meeting him without resistance. A driver opened the door. Bumpy paused before getting in, looking once more at the block that had raised him, challenged him, stood with him. The community wasn't built on fear. It was built on consistency. Inside that room, men would sit at tables for years to come. They would choose their words carefully. They would remember where laughter belonged and where it didn't. They would remember that power didn't chase, that respect didn't shout, that patience is always collected. And somewhere in that memory, Bumpy Johnson would remain, not as a monster, not as a myth, but as a man who proved that violence was optional, but accountability was not.